Hi everyone, it's Macy, and this is why The Prisoner of Azkaban is the best Harry Potter movie. So I guess I should clarify that this is the best movie in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, but in my opinion this is by far the best Harry Potter movie. So I will be making similar, if not the same, points as Nerdwriter's video called Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Why It's the Best. I will be referencing that video a lot, so it will be linked down below in the description so you can go watch it because it's an amazing video. Like, please watch it. It does such a better job at explaining this than I ever could. Now, before I gush over how amazing this movie is, I'm going to be mentioning the flaws because, you know, every movie does. This movie definitely has some flaws in it that I will be addressing. So these are just some of the flaws that it has. Making Snape look like a good person. I'm going to be making another video just on Snape in the future because I have some very strong opinions on him. I'm going to explain this in a different video, but in a summary, it took some of the stuff from the book and it made him look like a better person in the end, when in reality, none of that stuff ever happened. The scene in the Shrieking Shack when we first meet, officially meet Sirius and Lupin, and we find out that they're friends, and then we meet Scabbers, that whole thing, that is a shell. That scene is a shell of what it actually was in the books. In the books, it was this long, really amazing, drawn-out scene, but in the movies, it was just so cut short, and there was so much information that we didn't get. It's a shell of what it was from the books, and I feel like they could have done it a lot better. So the only portion of this movie that I had a problem with the pacing was, I don't know why it always seems like this, but whenever Buckbeak dies, and then they're hugging, and then Scabbers bites Ron's finger, always around that time of the movie, I always feel like it's going really slow, if that makes sense. I don't know, I always find myself thinking, oh god, it's only, we still have to go through the entire time turner thing and that whole debacle, and I don't know, I just feel like the pacing is just a little off in that moment, but for the rest of the movie it's fine. Also, Hermione stealing Ron's line in the Shrieking Shack. This is a reoccurring theme throughout the entire movie series from this movie and out. Sirius comes in as a dog, Hermione blocks him and says something like, if you want to kill him, you'll have to kill us too, that whole thing. That's Ron's line. That is Ron's line in the book and not Hermione's. Whoever is in charge of writing the script takes Ron's lines and make him look like a good character and not just the comic relief, and they give them to Hermione because she's the smart one and Ron's the funny guy. I hate it. A lot of things in this movie are done purely for aesthetic, and they don't make any sense in the sense of the wizarding world. A very good example is the scene when Harry is come out of the cellar from Honeydukes, and he's in the invisibility cloak, and he's walking through Honeydukes, and the camera's following him, and he's about to walk out the door, and he walks by Neville, and either he grabs it gets stuck to him, whatever. The lollipop, I think, gets stuck to the invisibility cloak, and then starts bobbing and floating away, and no one questions it. There is a red lollipop floating through the snowy road of Hogsmeade, and no one says anything. It doesn't make any sense. I get it, it's pretty, it's really pretty, that contrast with the red and the white, beautiful, but Alfonso, it makes no sense. Another one is in the beginning. This makes a really cool scene. This entire opening sequence is stunning. I love it, but it makes no sense. Literally, you're not allowed to do magic outside of Hogwarts. That is the #1 rule for students. And Harry literally gets in trouble for it later on in the movie. But here's Harry just casting the Lumos charm. No, it's just a really nice opening sequence, and I get that it's pretty, but Alfonso, it makes no sense. Okay, now that we got the flaws, cons, whatever you want to call them, out of the way, this is why, in my opinion, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is by far the best Harry Potter movie. First up, keep in mind, all of this is my opinion. You can disagree with me, you can not like what I'm saying, but this is my opinion. I'm allowed to have an opinion. Please comment below if you agree with me, if you disagree with me on any of these things, if what you think the best Harry Potter movie is, if you don't think that this is the best one. Please comment, tell me what you think, because I want to know. This movie is stunning. It's literally iconic shot after iconic shot. Cinematically, it's just beautiful. The color palette is genius. The entire movie is cool toned. Not straight up blue like The Order of the Phoenix, because that entire movie is just like a blue movie. I think you know what I'm talking about. But this movie is just cool toned. The cool tones are accented by hints of like maroon and gold throughout every scene, because maroon and gold are the Gryffindor colors, which is a really smart pick because Harry's in Gryffindor and it mostly takes place within the Gryffindor common room and, you know, following Gryffindors. And so the fact that the movie is completely cool toned and then accented by gold and maroon, like, this helps the movie feel very cohesive. As an art student, I adore a good color palette. Personally, I believe that this movie introduces the darkness into the series perfectly. The first two movies have a very light tone to them, a feeling of wonder, and they just felt truly magical. The warm colors washed over every frame, especially in the Philosopher's Stone, gives you this feeling of wonder and joy, and an overall welcoming feel as a viewer. This movie is a perfect transition. As stated in Nerdwriter's video, the first half of this movie is very reminiscent of the last two movies, with the whole Aunt Marge incident and the night bus. Even the Monster Book of Monsters scene adds to the whole, like, reminiscent feeling from the first two. When we run into the Weasleys and Hermione in the Leaky Cauldron for the first time, that is when the movie, I feel like, kind of shifts to the darker side a little bit more. I feel like from that moment, it gradually gets darker from there. Obviously, throughout the entire movie, there's going to be lighthearted and comedic moments, like, for instance, Lupin's Bogart lesson, or that slice of life moment when Harry and the other Gryffindor boys are eating candies. But from the moment they get on the train and experience Dementors for the very first time, the movie is kind of cast in the shadow of darkness, which is appropriate because that was the first time that they ran into Dementors, and Dementors suck the happiness out of everything. So in summary, this movie is an amazing transition period. This movie really set the tone for the movies to come, but it was still very reminiscent of the past two movies. But that is another thing to mention. Throughout this entire movie, we are cast into a feeling of darkness and gloom just through the weather. If you notice, it always seems to be storming or gloomy or snowing throughout the entire movie. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of a scene that is just with a blue sky. And if it's not happening during the gloomy daytime, then the scenes are happening at night, which makes this movie look a lot darker in comparison to the last two. It helps with the tone that the movie is trying to communicate to the viewer. This movie also had to recast Dumbledore. I personally think Michael Gambon's Dumbledore could not have come in at a better time. I just think that this Dumbledore fits with this movie so well. He's not as soft-spoken, he's rougher, louder, and all around kind of quirkier, and that fits perfectly. This movie really replaced the feeling of wonder and discovery of magic and really showcased the quirkiness of the wizarding world. Another aspect that helps with the overall feel of the movie is the music. For the most part, this movie shares the same tunes as the first two, but it sounds more mature to go along with the whole grown-up feeling of this movie. Along with the familiar music, medieval aspects were woven in along with more ominous and sinister sounding tracks to go hand in hand with the darker themes and story. For me, one of my favorite aspects of the entire Harry Potter universe and story are the Marauders. So I will admit that the fact that they are introduced in this movie kind of gives me a bias. Remus Lupin is one of, if not my favorite character in the entire Harry Potter universe. I truly believe that his best performance is in this movie. After this movie, Lupin is kind of an afterthought, especially his relationship with Tonks. I just really love how you can tell where he is in the cycle depending on how sickly he looks. I also have so much love for Sirius Black. I couldn't imagine anyone else playing this role other than Gary Oldman. He just does such a phenomenal job, being scary when he needs to be and being soft and loving when he's with Harry. Daniel Radcliffe even said that he feels the best when he's acting with Gary, and that really shows. The first two acts of this movie are haunted by him. The posters and the first encounters are terrifying, but then we just learn that he's this soft, loving man. Even though I mentioned as one of the flaws the pacing being weird in that one area, I specifically mentioned that one area because for the rest of the movie, I feel like they do a really good job at keeping the momentum. The camera never stops moving in almost, if not every shot. This gives the movie a sense of moving forward and momentum, and it's always engaging for the audience to look at. The Dementors are the darkest thing introduced into the Harry Potter universe thus far, especially at this point in the series. I mean, they literally suck the happiness and joy out of everything. They are constantly felt throughout the movie, especially shown in the transition scenes. One of my favorite scenes is a transition scene. It's the one where it's like a meadow of flowers, and then Hogwarts is in the background like a silhouette, and slowly we see the Dementor like floating over the flowers, and the flowers are getting covered in frost and wilting, and then that one like set of flowers comes into focus in your foreground, and everything else is blurred, and they just like wilt and die and get covered in this like layer of frost as the Dementors sweep over them. There are two consistent themes throughout this movie: isolation and time. With the darker themes comes the burden of the title, The Chosen One. Even though this series focuses a lot on friendship and the power of it, Harry goes through a lot of things that he has to handle by himself. This movie foreshadows to that a lot, Harry being isolated by his peers in many scenes. The obvious one is when he can't go to Hogsmeade and he's forced to stay in the castle by himself. Other more subtle ways is like when Harry is in the scene with Buckbeak and Hagrid asks for a volunteer, and all of his peers back away, isolating Harry by himself. Or another one is when Hagrid is explaining to them that Buckbeak has been sentenced to death and he's skipping stones in the lake. Hagrid is in the foreground and the trio is in the background. Harry is on one side of Hagrid and Ron and Hermione are on the other. If you pay attention in this movie, you'll notice that Alfonso never really misses a beat or misses a chance to isolate Harry and touch on that theme. Time is not only a theme in this movie because of the time travel, but also the fact that it's racing against Harry. The clock tower plays a huge role in this and is used to show that the time is racing against him. The clock tower and clock tower courtyard are very significant places throughout this movie. If you notice, a lot of the scenes take place in the courtyard or in the clock tower or around that area. It is used a lot in the time travel sequence. The camera pans through the clock tower and out the window as Harry and Hermione are running from the hospital wing. On occasion throughout the movie, you can also hear the chimes of the clock tower or the clock tower is shown, and this also kind of adds to the anxiety that the characters are feeling. Again, going back to the moving camera really helps with the momentum with the movie, but also the fact that time is running against Harry. There's a point in the movie when these two themes collide. There's a transition scene when it is snowing, and you can see it goes from no snow to snow, and Hedwig is flying through that, and it slowly transitions to like, that means like time has passed, weather is changing, and then the camera swoops in to the clock tower and zooms in on Harry, and he is standing behind the clock tower by himself as the hand slowly goes by his face. It's a really beautiful scene, but he's also watching his friends go off to Hogsmeade, so it's going on that theme of time and isolation. I'm only going to touch lightly on this because, again, Nerdwriter does a really good job at explaining this, but the creative decision to constantly have the camera going through glass is beautiful. I absolutely adore the creative decision to constantly have the camera moving through glass. It happens throughout the movie, but I think the most notable time is during the Bogart lesson. It travels through the glass twice throughout it, and I just think it's brilliant. Another thing I think this movie did really well is the loyalty to the appearance of the trio. What I mean is that Harry, Ron, and Hermione look more like they were described in the books in the movies than they were in any other movie. Harry actually has messy hair and is skinny and pale. Because of Ron's haircut at points, it makes his face look longer. And this is the last time that we see Hermione's hair relatively big. Along with the trio, the students in general just look more realistic. This is the first time we see students looking worn and wearing their clothes naturally, not perfectly dressed all the time like in the past two movies. It really makes it feel more real to me. I never really felt that Daniel, Rupert, or Emma really fit the book description of the characters, but this is the closest that we get to that. Another thing that this movie did really well is giving a sense of space and how this castle works. Throughout the Harry Potter series, Hogwarts is more of a character than anything, than just a castle. It's a wizarding school, for crying out loud. Of course it's gonna have its own personality. Up until this movie, the castle didn't really feel like it had much personality, if not any. In the past two films, it's been very wondrous and just very clean. But in this movie, it finally feels like it has a mind of its own. A good example is that the paintings are more realistic and human-like than robotic. A large reason why I think this castle finally feels like a whole cohesive castle instead of different sets and different pieces is because of the Marauders map. One of Alfonso's goals with this movie was to really make Hogwarts feel like it had its own characteristics and it was its own character. And I really believe that he achieved that with this movie. I really feel like Hogwarts' character was really established in this movie. This part of the story is known as the year that Voldemort took a break. As a book, I feel like it flows perfectly with the other ones. As a movie, I feel like it had to stand up more cinematically to fit in with the others. The average person might not think to watch this movie because Voldemort took a break. They might just think to skip over it because Voldemort's not in it, so it must not be that important. But because this movie stands out so much cinematically, it has definitely become a fan favorite. With introducing the darker themes with this movie, it was also introduced the themes of mental health. This movie introduced the Dementors, the literal embodiment of depression. My favorite spell is the Patronus Charm. Like many others, the Harry Potter series has really helped me through some dark times in my life. In my younger years, a way that I would help cope with my depression was with Harry Potter. Seeing Harry use the Patronus Charm to get rid of the Dementors was almost therapeutic to me. I adore the "happiness can be found even in the darkest of time" quote that is movie exclusive. Other than helping me personally, I feel like that quote really sets the tone for the rest of the series. It applies to daily life as well, because happiness can be found even in the darkest of times if one only remembers to turn on the light. So those are my reasons as to why The Prisoner of Azkaban is the best Harry Potter movie, in my own opinion. If you like this video, then please leave a like, and if you want to see more of my face, then please feel free to subscribe down below. Thank you so much again for watching this video. Don't let the Muggles get you down. Bye!